So, welcome everyone. I'm so happy that we're doing this panel discussion today. And to the audience that's probably slowly trickling in now, hello and welcome to HeroTalks. We've been doing this for quite a while now at Delivery Hero, and I'm so excited about today's discussion, which is about community at work and how ERGs can help foster an inclusive workplace. So my name's Lena Carlson. I'm a senior specialist in communications at Delivery Hero, and I'm joined by three amazing guests today. We have Patricia Pierre, who is also working at Delivery Hero, Rachael Schneider from Wayfair, and Chris Hunter from N26. And I will let them introduce themselves in a minute. But basically, just to give a little bit of context to why we're hosting this panel discussion today, we've just come off celebrating Pride Month, and it was like a month of celebration here at Delivery Hero, particularly of our proud heroes. And now we want to give some spotlight to our communities and also to the other tech companies in Berlin. So basically today we want to dive into the importance of community at work, creating an inclusive environment, and the role that ERGs, which are employer resource groups, can play in this, which is something that I think all of the companies that we're talking to today have a lot to tell us and a lot that we can learn from it. So without further ado, welcome to my guests. Patty, did you want to introduce yourself firstly, who you are and what you're doing at Delivery Hero?
Sure, of course. I'm Patty, and I'm a talent acquisition manager in our tech and product recruiting squad. Been with Delivery Hero for a little bit over 2.5 years, and also a member of our Proud Heroes community. Yeah, that's me.
Nice. And I'll hand it over to Rachael if you also wanted to introduce who you are and what you're doing at Wayfair.
Hello everyone, I'm Rachael. I use she, her pronouns. I've been at Wayfair for a little over 3 years now, just had my anniversary. I am a senior analyst in our European retail tooling and analytics team. So I do a little bit of back-end data stuff and a little bit of front-end dashboard building. And I'm also the co-lead for Way Out, which is the employee resource group for the Lgbtqia plus community and allies at Wayfair.
Nice. And Chris, finally, if you wanted to introduce yourself as well today.
Thank you very much. So Chris Hunter, I'm the Global Head of Recruitment for Business and Executive over at N26. Been there since December of last year. Feels like a long time. And I'm also a member of our Pride ERG.
Very nice. So, as I just said at the beginning, we're going to be talking about community at work and the role that ERGs can play. To the audience that's listening, if you have questions, you can put it in the Q&A and we will answer all of those at the end or try and get through as many as possible. So please feel free to ask away. Also, if you're watching from Delivery Hero, you can put your questions on Workplace and we can also answer those. So let's start at the beginning. What is an ERG? Would someone care to explain, just to maybe someone in the audience who doesn't know what it is? Chris?
Yeah, sure. So Employee Resource Group is a group which is organised within the individual businesses, which allows places to build community, which is encouraging of diversity and allows people to have a kind of safe space and a voice to kind of drive action within the organisation, but also to, like I say, provide that safe community for individual groups. So it can be split across kind of many different areas. And today we're here talking about kind of Pride specifically, but I know at N26 we also have Women Eggs, we have parents. So it's really about trying to engender and create that community within the organisation.
I think that sums it up pretty nicely. So at Delivery Hero, we call our ERGs HeroCommunities, and we actually have 3 of them at the moment. So we have like the Muslim heroes, the Proud heroes, and the female heroes. Patty, can you maybe tell us about your involvement in some of the HeroCommunities at Delivery Hero?
Of course, sure. So I'm most active with the Proud Heroes. I did briefly join the female heroes as well, but scheduling made it so that I really had to make a decision about which one I would participate in for the most part. So I decided to go with Proud Heroes. One of my colleagues in the recruiting team invited me to join and help with the CSD truck when we had the first year that we participated in CSD in Berlin, and that's how I got involved. Still participating now, really enjoying it. It's a great group of people. We're sort of at this stage now, I think we're fairly new. We're trying to sort of build our numbers and grow, and we have, of course, some dedicated work streams, trying to sort of affect some change, of course, in the organization as well. But yeah, I'm participating and, of course, really enjoying it. And it's a great group of people.
Nice. As I understand it, Delivery Hero too, now like when any newcomers join, they essentially get an introduction to the Hero communities in their first week as well, so that there's really this like opportunity from like day one to get involved in those communities, which I think is cool. And Rachael, you're co-leading the Berlin chapter of Wayfair, and it has such a cool name, Way Out, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So Way Out is one of the oldest ERGs at Wayfair. It started kind of before we had a really formalized concept of employee resource groups in the Boston office, which is our like central location. And since then, over the past few years, we've had chapters start across all of our other offices and many different field locations. And I'm really lucky to be the co-lead, or I'm honored at least to be the co-lead of our Berlin location, which started just over a year ago.
That's awesome. And I'm sure all of you agree that the ERGs or the Hero Communities or the Way Out group, you know, whatever it's called, is playing a central role in the workplace and kind of fostering this sense of community and creating an inclusive environment. But why do you think community is so important and so important to have in the workplace, Chris?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that there are a number of key areas that are included by community, but if I just take my own personal experience, I think that there's a real stigma when you're growing up and kind of you're living your life. There is this kind of fear. There's a gay shame, as it's called, about being open, being out, and being proud in different environments. And there are different kind of milestones throughout your life where this is most prominent. You know, when you go to a new school or a university, and work often is an area where people will begin to feel concerned, worried, scared. How they're going to be, received. How is it going to actually, day to day? How are they going to feel? And a community in that organisation allows that person safe to know that the organisation is open-armed, willing, and wants to embrace different diversity. But also it allows a place for me to then go and be able to share thoughts, feelings with other people that understand where I'm coming from as well. So I think that in terms of looking at the wider business, it's great to have that community and to flag the ERGs because it demonstrates that this is that type of business. But also from a personal level, just being able to have that space to go to share and to be openly proud of kind of who we are and reject kind of where we've had to come from previously.
Yeah. I see Rachael and Patty both nodding their heads. Maybe did you want to elaborate that on, Rachael? What does community mean to you and why is it so important in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, like definitely building on that. I think there's like the positive of like coming together and like feeling seen and not maybe feeling so alone, which I think can definitely happen when you come from maybe like a more like marginalized or less visible background. And so to go and be around your community and see that, okay, we are here and feel comfortable. I also think it's really good for like helping to improve like the company itself so that people have a place where they can be like, oh, like this thing happened, like I don't know how to address it, and maybe like finding ways of doing that within the community and feeling comfort in like I can go forward from here and that I'm seen and heard and we're working to improve the place for myself and other people like me.
I love that. And Patty, I have to ask as well, what does community mean to you and why is it so important?
Of course, yeah. I'm actually going to draw on something Chris said when we met last week, which really spoke to me. I think sometimes in the world there are these things happening, right? Like that really affect your community. I know a couple of weeks ago there was this news story about a young man being beaten to death in Spain, I believe it was. And I think as part of the LGBTQ community, you're really sort of in tune to these things, but maybe your sort of general colleagues and family and whatever are not. And being part of the ERG and being part of that group, these things that are important to you are sort of shared and you can discuss, and it can be a safe space where you can sort of talk about how scary it is and how there still are really quite a few challenges. So I guess first and foremost, community for me is a safe space and a place where I know that people sort of share some of the concerns that I have, some of the fears, and it's really somehow therapeutic to be able to sort of go to that space and talk about it and with people who are experiencing it as well.
Yeah. We actually just got a question, which basically touches upon exactly that, Patty, about like, do ERGs serve itself to provide a safe space and community, or does the ERG have a more influencing role driving change outside the group? What do you think about that?
Both. I think it depends what the person who's a part of the ERG wants to do. I think we have to have a space that's both, could be just for somebody a social circle. Maybe not everybody sees themselves as an activist and doesn't really so much want to get involved so deeply into those things and just wants really a community. So it can be that. But also I think all of our ERGs are sort of doing sort of some activism, just awareness raising, having, you know, this HeroTalks as well, just sharing our experiences with the wider community. I think just to sort of give people some insight into what we experience on a day-to-day basis, that's also very important. But I think to have a successful ERG, it's really important that people who maybe have been traumatized by, you know, just being gay or lesbian or bi or whatever, or trans, don't feel like to be part of the ERG, they have to sort of become like this outspoken activist, because that's not everybody's personality. And so I think it has to be a space where both can sort of come together and be a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And I know we've spoken a little bit about like kind of different work streams, you know, different ways that people get involved. Rachel, what are some of the practical ways people can do that at Wayfair?
Yeah, so Way Out is a group for LGBTQIA plus people and allies, which I think is really important to us, and also I think connects nicely to what Patty said, because there's like different spaces and different things. So some of our spaces are just social or kind of like internal safe spaces for the LGBTQIA plus community, and allies are welcome, but maybe sometimes you recognize that like this is not the space for me because it's a safe space for people who maybe have experienced something traumatic. But that being said, it's also very important for us to use allyship as part of our group, because we really need those people there supporting us. And also, I think it's very important for us to not force people to necessarily out themselves. So some people may want to continue to identify as an ally, maybe because they're questioning, or maybe because they don't want to be out yet at work because it's not a safe space. So there's like kind of that side of things, which is more a communal, internal safe space. And then we also have people who are participating in educational things for the wider company. So we've had conversations about how to use pronouns, why to use pronouns, what is gender, and also maybe more fun events, like we've had movie screenings and conversations after. So there's a variety of different ways to get involved.
Nice. Is it the same at N26, Chris, or how does it look?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we look at the kind of the three kind of supporting pillars of what IERG looks at, it's education, celebration, and donation. So how can we educate? How can we celebrate? And how can we actually drive donation to try and specifically work around charities that are going to be helping communities? But there are a couple of things which I just wanted to pick up on, which I mean, in total agreement with Rachel and Patty. The first is, I think that an ERG doesn't have to have one sole purpose. It can serve multiple purposes and be equally as effective across those. So if it is, identifying a space for people to just come and feel that they are part of a community, whether they want to contribute to that or simply be a part of it, it should serve that purpose. If we are looking at how do we drive education throughout the rest of the business, throughout the rest of the company, that should also be, we should be kind of the innovators and drivers around that. And we're doing a lot of work partnering with a couple of external providers at the moment to actually kind of raise that awareness level. But I think the thing which is really important, and again, this goes back to what Rachel said, is that community, we talked about what community does mean. What community doesn't mean is separation. What it doesn't mean is that we simply kind of will say, well, this is a space for us and therefore we will block ourselves, nobody else is kind of like allowed in, but also we can't then be part of the wider community in the organisation as well. And I think it's really important because sometimes some of the pushback that I hear is more around, well, you're creating more of an us and them culture, and that's actually not it. It's fundamentally about allowing people to have that space, to be inclusive to everybody, and to make sure that the whole business is able to learn and grow together rather than simply just this group.
I love that. And I think that's like also back to what Rachel was saying just about like the allyship. Like you don't need to be queer to be part of like the Proud Heroes. You don't actually need to be a female to be part of the female heroes at Delivery Hero. It's about creating an environment that is super inclusive. It's a safe space and like letting people be 100% themselves at work. what I would like to know now is, how has that shifted, creating that sense of community in this kind of hybrid virtual environment? Because obviously that brings immense challenges to what you're already doing. I'd love to know from you first, Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been difficult, but it's also been really like it's provided some really awesome opportunities at the same time. So Way Out in Berlin began right before COVID happened. So we had our first meeting all together around a beer keg in the office, and then a week later, everybody was sent home. And that has been very difficult in the sense of it's hard to show up to a virtual event if you don't already have that community in place and you don't know who's going to be in that Google Hangout, Zoom room, whatever. So we had to get creative. We had to figure out ways of engaging with people over Slack, putting up little polls, trying to pull people in. And we definitely have had some more successful events, some cocktail hours on Fridays, and some less successful ones. But I think that also comes with a little bit of the screen fatigue that everyone has experienced. On the other hand, like some of the really great opportunities is like it's far more accessible to people who maybe were working remotely anyways. So like they don't have to come into the office in order to participate in community. It's given us a lot more connection to chapters in other locations. So we have a lot of sales and service people working virtually in the UK and Ireland, and we've developed a lot closer connection to that community. We've also developed a lot closer connection to the warehouse. So there's a lot of different ways of doing things. I don't think that virtual in any way is going to replace our community entirely, and you need that kind of trust and comfort of meeting in person to build community. But I think that we've adapted to this well, and I think it will also kind of become a part of the way that we interact moving forward.
Yeah. Patty, can you give us also maybe like some practical examples of what Delivery Hero is doing in terms of this kind of virtual hybrid setting to kind of create the sense of community in this interesting setting?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for sure. I think, I'm getting sort of to the end of my enjoyment of all of these virtual meetings, right? It would be nice to sort of get back to the in-person things that we were doing, like having Friday beers at the office. And there was always sort of this being able to like physically take myself away from like work and like go to like a conference room and have the meeting was super great. But we are still having our meetings over Zoom, which is still nice. I mean, also in your own home, if you're working remotely, it's nice to sort of not lose that sense of community since we're all sort of stuck at home for the past year and a half, right? So that was a good thing, just being able to... I'm sorry, Lena, did you say something?
No, I was just agreeing that it's been a long time.
Sorry, I saw your mouth moving, but my screen froze. So this is really nice. We also have these work streams that I think working from home, you sort of have hopefully a bit more time to participate in them, and you sort of are in the comfort of your own home. I think for many people, home is a safe space. And so that I think could be a positive, as if you're sort of really uncomfortable sort of in the office. If you just sort of turn on your computer and attend our meetings. We also have our Slack channel. We have our workplace group where we try to sort of post things, and like we try to post like books, movies, TV shows you can watch, just sort of little ways to sort of take yourself away from work and be a part of the Proud Heroes. We're of course hoping to be able to in the future get back to the office and our previous way of doing things, but until then we still have this platform to sort of keep us together until then.
Totally. Chris, I have a question for you that's just come in from the audience about how do you improve and promote ERGs in the company. So I think that's really interesting, actually. Like, maybe we're preaching to the choir here that like ERGs are good, but how do you maybe share that message throughout the broader organization to people who are not part of the ERGs?
Okay, sure. So I think that the first point which you actually mentioned is ERGs shouldn't be seen as simply an addition to the business. They should be a part of the business. And I think that often if they, if rather than having to try and prove their worth or validate themselves because they are seen as essential service, if they become part of the DNA of the business, it's already implicit in what you do. So the question really is, how do we then try to actually make this part of the DNA of the organisation? One of the things you touched on earlier, which we are certainly looking at in 26, is right from the moment that somebody is onboarded from the first touch point as an actual N26 employee. We want them to be open and exposed to the different ERGs. We want to educate them as to kind of exactly what we do, the outcomes that we're expecting, and why it's important to us as a business. I think that setting clear objectives around, we talked about kind of the activism piece. What is it we're trying to achieve? How do we then kind of actually influence across those different areas, and being really focused on kind of how do we drive that outcome? Who do we have to pull in? We have an ELT sponsor who comes along to the. He's actually really engaged, and he wanted to know, well, what can I do more? How can I promote this from the wider team, so that not only is it just kind of the ERG kind of trying to push up, but actually we have the ELT sponsorship also trying to create that from the top down in the organisation as well. So I think that set clear, defined objectives. Why are we doing this? What are the benefits to our employees? How does this help us as an organisation? And then kind of set smaller chunks in terms of these are the things that we have to do in order to achieve that, and allow people to come onto that journey and see kind of the impact that it can make. And again, not try to kind of force people to kind of participate as and when they don't want to. Some people may not feel comfortable, but allow them that space so that they recognise the impact it does make for those people who do want to get involved, really.
Is it the same at Wayfair, Rachel?
Yeah, I definitely would say that it's similar. I think it's also really important to as you're saying, not just preach to the choir, get out the visibility of the importance of these different groups. So making sure that you're in the all company updates, and making sure that it's really clear that leadership supports and encourages these groups, and that it's not just an extra thing. It is really integral.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We have another question coming from the audience, which is specifically about how can an ERG help organizational efforts to address racial or gender inequality? Patty, did you want to give your take on that one?
Yeah, sure. I guess one of Chris's pillars again, trying what you said, Chris, education. I think at Delivery Hero have a couple of different ways that we're doing this that are not necessarily directly tied to the ERGs, but we have these Let's Talk About series to sort of educate the wider community about these issues, which I think has been really helpful, because we've been hearing about the lived experience of people who are going through the issues and the problems and the challenges that it means that you have when you're a part of the LGBTQ community, or a person of color in wherever you're living, or a trans person. And this kind of education, I think, has been really really useful and really helpful, because it's a safe space for also people who want to learn to ask questions. And we've also had some of our ERG members hosting these, which is nice, so you also get their experience as well. Because I think sometimes there's a disconnect between, if you're not sort of experiencing racism or homophobia or disability discrimination, you have these blinders and you don't see all of the challenges this community is facing. And I think sometimes this is where this sort of mentality, we're open, we're free, everything is fine now, so we don't really need these communities. But really listening to people's lived experience and the specific challenges they've faced as part of these communities is really important. And I think this education is really integral to helping organizations support their employees who are sort of suffering from these challenges.
Yeah. When we previously spoke, we were kind of talking about the importance of ERGs, and it was kind of not what are the consequences of having it? It's what are the consequences of not having, for example, an LGBTQIA ERG in the workplace. And I think that was really interesting. Chris, did you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I think the example which I drew on, which kind of goes to the last question as well, was particularly in the UK recently. We've had a lot of talk around, it's not good enough to not be racist. One has to be anti-racist. And I think that if we kind of look at this in terms of ERGs in business, to simply to not have it, but to say we're open and inclusive, doesn't do enough to actually positively say that we are doing this. And I think that people talk about kind of the ideal world where this isn't necessary, but A, no, we're certainly not there yet. And B, we still need to be having kind of creating these safe spaces. So whilst we do, as organisations, we have to be looking at how can we positively create these spaces and drive kind of with these ERGs at the heart of it. Because by not having it, the signal that sends, whether it's, whether the intention is, well, we don't need this because we're all here, what it shows is that you're actually not listening to the community. There are assumptions being made on behalf of the community, and actually that's not productive for your staff or for the entire business as a whole. And I think this kind of also ties into the last question in terms of how do you kind of get genuine change. And I think that what's kind of sometimes done is that business growth, business objectives, individual objectives, and actually having a fair community within the organisation is seen as two different things. Whereas actually one is only possible if you achieve the second. So in order to get equity within the organisation, in order to get a genuinely progressive business that is proactively inclusive, you have to focus on the first. You have to focus on the people, and that comes down to fundamentally how ERGs can help implement that. So if you're looking to try and have these conversations about how you can demonstrate impact, tie it into the business vision.
Yeah, I love that. That's also an interesting question that we just got on that as well. This actually comes from a former intern at Wayfair, so Rachel, it's for you. But she or he says that Way Out's presence gave them the confidence to perform better at their role and be themselves at work. Way Out and Wayfair created an amazing platform for promoting equality. But the question is how do ERGs measure their performance and impact in the business?
Yeah, so that's something that we've thought a lot about. Just a little bit more background on how things work at Wayfair. So we don't just have employee resource groups. We also have affinity groups and business resource groups. And an affinity group is maybe like more functions as like a social club. It's a little bit smaller, still supported, still around like an identity of some sort. And those develop into our employee resource groups, which then are a little bit more formalized, and we are required to have like OKRs and things. And like the business resource group is the next step where you're working like very closely with, say, talent and acquisition or something to drive business related objectives that are then like measured within the business. So like as an ERG, we define our own OKRs. So that's things like we're going to set up NPS, so Net Promoter Score surveys, and send those out to people who are attending our events and see how do people feel about them. We're going to measure like how many people formally are part of our Slack groups, how many people are attending our different events. And then in terms of like business impact, as we move into maybe a space more of like a business resource group, working with talent and acquisition, we see, does this have an improvement on things like queer people, self-identifying queer people who are applying to Wayfair and taking roles at Wayfair? When we're doing like our voice surveys where people can choose to self-identify as part of Way Out or as part of the LGBTQIA plus community, like how does retention look for them? How do they look in terms of like their happiness within the company? So we have our own internal things for just our employee resource group, but then we're also trying to connect that into the business.
Yeah. And you're doing like specific surveys and stuff like that to basically find that out?
Yeah. So obviously it's a little bit different in the European setting versus the US because of GDPR stuff, but we're starting to try and get into some more like voluntary information sharing so that we can better serve our community. It's obviously difficult because we can't get too specific about anything, but we're starting to like try and find ways to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important too, to be opening up that conversation and getting that feedback as well from, the entire company when it's possible. And we had another question on specific communications for ERGs, and what is the best way to distribute communications? As in, should it be coming from HR? Should it be coming from the ERG? Should it be coming from the C-level? I'd be really curious to know your thoughts on that, Patty.
All of the above that you mentioned. Yeah, I mean, I think if it comes just from the members of the ERG, it somehow invalidates it a bit as being sort of a business goal and integral to the core of the business. So, like for example, when our CTO sort of speaks up for something that is sort of affecting the proud heroes, that's noted, and we really appreciate that. And I think the whole company sort of sees that this is not just some sort of outlying group, causing trouble. Like this is a part of our business goals to be in a diverse and inclusive environment. So if it's a combination of all three, I think that's great. C-level is always good, I think, to sort of drive things from the top down. But also, I think the members of the ERG should also be empowered, right, to also stand up and send these messages as well. So it's a group effort and not just sort of coming from one place in the organization.
Yeah. I see you nodding your head, Chris. How is it working for you at N26?
Well, I couldn't agree more, right? The more voices, the better. So I think that if we have it coming directly from the ERG, yes, it has some sway, and it was absolutely great because recently some of the members actually presented at an all hands, and there was so much activity which was happening that people weren't aware of, and it sparked other conversations and other people wanted to get involved, and that was brilliant. So there's absolute value in doing that. But then at the same time, when we have an entire company all hands and it starts with the CEO and C-level talking about kind of the reason why we're actually making this part of the fundamentals of who we are as a business rather than just for Pride Month, that also has a lot of impact. So I think that if we look at kind of the broad scale, there are different touch points along that journey of kind of driving us to being where we want to be, that different people can impact and have effect in different ways. And I think if we could try and include as many people in that as possible, then that can only be a good thing.
Definitely. And I love what you said there about, doing stuff not only during Pride Month, it needs to be basically all year round, but how can we keep that momentum going? Because I completely agree. Rachel, what would be your take on that?
Yeah, so we actually didn't focus a lot on programming for Pride Month personally, and I mean in Berlin we celebrate more in July, so we let the other side of the business over in Boston kind of take on stuff for that. But we also we didn't do a lot of programming in Pride Month because we wanted this to be an opportunity for our members to kind of have a break and to celebrate. And instead we focus a lot of the rest of the year on having events outside of that to show that it's not just this 1 month a year. We are we're here and we're visible to the entire community every quarter. So we're trying to have social events at least once a month, once every other month, and educational events once every quarter at least, and bring in outside speakers. So Pride Month is great and it's the time that we want to celebrate, but I think that especially within our groups, it kind of proves that we're not just say rainbow washing when we just do things in this month and everybody looks. It's about looking at the full year.
Yeah. And maybe this is also a really important thing about the ERGs is that it's not rainbow washing. It's coming from, employees. It's all throughout the business, it's really doing it very genuinely and authentically.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that with any employee resource group, I'm sure it's the same at N26 and Delivery Hero. It's employee driven entirely. It's not diversity, equity, inclusion, or talent or somebody coming in and being we want a group for this identity. It is always employees doing it and taking extra time out to really spend on this and think about programming and things.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about it a little bit, but how do you really encourage people to, speak out and make their voice heard and kind of share their thoughts and feelings when maybe they do kind of want to, kind of sit on the sidelines and they're not sure how exactly they want to interact or participate? What kind of things can you do to kind of foster that community a bit deeper?
I think I'll say something here. So I think you sort of have to leverage the power of one-to-one relationships. I myself have always been better one-on-one than with a big group of people, because that's sort of I think the first step to making people feel comfortable speaking out. It's okay, well, here's one person who I can connect with and talk to, and they're encouraging me to speak out and participate and be involved in these things. And I think that's really powerful. You come to a meeting and you see people maybe are strangers to you. That's going to be challenging, right? Because not everybody is outgoing. And you have to sort of make a space for people of all different kinds of personalities. And so I think sort of the people who are already part of the group really sort of taking the time to make connections with people who they're inviting to be a part of it and encouraging them to participate, showing them the ropes, explaining to them how we do things in the group and how we really want to have their ideas to help them grow it would be really sort of helpful in getting people to feel comfortable participating as a first step.
And can I just add to that also, not believing that there is only one way to have your voice heard. I think that you can still be impactful, be a part of something and have your voice heard, but in different ways, depending on where you feel most comfortable and where your strengths are. So yeah, absolutely, we should encourage everybody to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to, in whichever way they choose, have their input felt and their voice heard. I think that having kind of multiple touch points, different ways of doing that, engagement in different projects, the way that they feel most comfortable, but showing them that, if they want to, there are various different options. That's super important. We shouldn't kind of just define in our own minds what we believe kind of the voice being heard is, and then try and drive people towards it. That's not the right way.
No, I love that. Can you maybe be even more specific about some of these other ways that you can encourage people in that sense?
Go ahead, Chris. It was to you. Go.
Sure. So, for instance, as if I go back to kind of the education, celebration, and donation piece that we're currently doing over at N26, there could be things which, particularly within the product or within actually kind of building the ideation, pulling in the teams, that people feel kind of most comfortable and they can really kind of have an impact. How they say it's where they feel that they can help shape what we're doing, but they don't necessarily want to be the one kind of at the front or having to take this to wider groups of communities. They want to be part of kind of the team that are building and investing in these ideas. Well, that's still then being able to have their voice heard, and that is equally as important, if not more important, than necessarily the person that then stands or jumps onto a call like this and then presents it. So I think that it's allowing people to kind of use where they feel comfortable and where they feel most is their strength, to be able to contribute their voice in their way, because their voice may not be a vocal voice, it may be through practical action instead.
Yeah, I also think about a lot of really small ways that you can just raise the level of security and comfort throughout it. So I know one personal kind of goal I've set for myself, and that I know other people have, is always introducing yourself with pronouns, especially in spaces that are not necessarily the LGBTQIA plus space where it's the norm. And by doing that, you start to create a culture where that's expected and accepted, and then it makes it a little bit easier for people to speak up, because there's already just this raised level of comfort with being yourself.
Yeah. You actually mentioned this earlier, that you guys were working on a few initiatives within Wayfair, for example, education about pronouns and gender. Could you also tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so earlier in the year, there was kind of a little bit of a change on Slack, where there was now the area to have pronouns, and then there was kind of a push for people to adopt that. And there was a bit of confusion, and we saw in a couple of Slack channels, what is this? Where is this coming from? Why is this important? And we wanted to address that in a way that was kind of positive and calling people in, rather than maybe what do you mean you don't get this? So we had a lunch and learn, and we were specifically not just targeting the way out community, but we're trying to reach out to our teams, or to Slack channels where we saw people maybe experiencing confusion, to provide education about why it's important to have pronouns, why it's important to share your pronouns, even if you think, oh, it's obvious. I think that there's a really great example that I just want to share as a quick anecdote, when it comes to using people's pronouns correctly, asking about people's pronouns. You wouldn't look at somebody and be oh, this person looks like a Chris, I'm going to call this person Chris. So we don't need to do that with pronouns either. And you can also just make that easier and more comfortable for somebody who maybe doesn't use what are seen as standard pronouns, by always sharing yours. And so it was just doing a little bit about that, and then also maybe getting into a little bit more background about differences in gender and sex, and what some of those are. And we created a lunch and learn, and had an open discussion, which a lot of people participated in. So continuing to do that work, continuing to bring it to other teams, sales and service, the warehouses. Yeah.
Nice. Patty, do you have maybe some examples of stuff that you're doing in the Proud Heroes as well, in terms of small activities or interactions like that?
Yeah, I guess they're not so small. We actually have work streams. So we have so they're pretty well organized by our two co-chairs of the Proud Heroes. So we have internal visibility, where we're trying to, again, I think we're still a pretty new group, and we're trying to sort of increase membership and get people more interested and active. So we have different projects there within internal visibility. Then we have an external visibility work stream, where we're sort of involved in being sort of with the Proud at Work, that's in Germany. Also, we did the Ulala audit, where they audited our internal systems, and this also pushed us to sort of fix some of the things that we needed to sort of be recognized by ULA. This is also something we worked on. We also have a work stream for internal processes, which is working on, hopefully this quarter I'll be able to sort of create a recruiting training about the LGBTQ community that would, of course, include things like pronouns, which I want to sort of bring to the whole team. I recently saw one of our co-members share that we have a document about how, if you want to sort of change your gender, if you're trans, how to have a set process and somebody you can go to affect that at Delivery Hero. There's one more that I wanted to mention but now I've lost it.
I mean, it's already quite a lot of stuff, I have to say.
It is, yeah. It can be challenging because it's sort of on top of your already like probably high workload, but I think it's really important. But we're doing a lot of these different work streams, and members can choose which ones they're involved in, they have time for, to make these changes.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in there. I had a quick question about how this works at Delivery Hero on N26. At Wayfair, when you're like an organizing member of an ERG, you're allocated at least like 10% of your working hours to that. And I'm wondering if there's kind of like guidelines around that for your ERG like organizing members.
Yeah, I think we're currently working on a time allowance project. I think one of our D&I members started. It's not complete yet, but we are looking into that so that we have allocated time to participate in ERGs. So looking forward to that to come through.
Yeah. I mean, that's really cool if we can like also like dedicate, work time to these kinds of important initiatives. I think it also, coming back to the business impact kind of illustrates that it is really important there. One thing I wanted to come back to though was allyship, because I think we've kind of been talking a little bit about it throughout like the last 40 minutes or so, but maybe specifically from your opinion, what's the best way forward and how can everyone really support ERGs and communities at work that they maybe are not necessarily self-identifying with? Chris?
So that's quite a big question. I think I think I'm probably going to start with kind of a bit of an example, and that is ERGs are started at work, they're driven from work, but the impacts and benefits don't stop at work. And by being able to educate and change in the internal community of work, these people, all of us, we go home. Well, in fact, we haven't got to go home. We've been at home, but ordinarily we would go home, and that learning that comes with us. And just in terms of kind of, you talk about kind of an experience. There was an anecdote where in a previous company, we had a father who. His son had come out to him and he just didn't kind of understand, and he used the ERG as a way to try and actually kind of broaden his understanding of, well, what does this look like? He automatically kind of went to these stereotypes of it's going to be incredibly tough, it's going to be difficult, and all of these things, but we were able to kind of educate. And I think that what I would say, kind of go back to your question, is how do we encourage it, is simply by being a place that is open to all questions, that does allow all people to come and ask, that if people are coming from a place because they want to, because they recognize they don't know more, to actually encourage that and to allow that to be a safe space for all to learn and to grow and to develop and to share. I think that also to, again, make it just integral to what you do as a business. When we're doing our onboarding, when we're doing our interviewing, when we're doing, when we're sending out kind of, even from a recruitment perspective, when we're sending out, job descriptions and introducing people to the business, this should be at the heart of everything we do, so that no matter whether you identify, whether you're an ally, where to go, that it's a safe space and that you can go with questions or with support and that it will be received.
Very nice. Rachel, did you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would also just second that allyship is a huge question. We've definitely been having kind of lunch and learns and panel discussions about this that are ongoing because there's just so much to cover. There's so many different ways to be an ally. I think that definitely one part of it is educating yourself. So not just looking to the community to do it all for you. We're super happy to have you here. We want you here. We want you here as an ally. We want you to feel comfortable. I think it's been funny at times when I've invited people to way out events. They're like, oh, but I'm not queer. And I'm like, that's okay. You don't have to be queer. This is a space for all of us. And maybe you'll learn something, or maybe you'll make a new friend, and maybe you'll see more that this is our company. We're all here. but also that like not only coming to that space, but learning a little bit outside of that space. So like learning a little bit more about pronouns, and then maybe kind of like using that in your team. So you don't have to identify as part of the community to be a support to the community and make everyone feel more comfortable.
Completely agree with that. Patty, I also see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big proponent of inclusive language. Even just when you see, like on LinkedIn, somebody has their pronouns there, that helps. I mean, it seems small, but it's like a signal to sort of the community that you support them. I hope that's why you have them there, and just sort of paying attention to the language that you use. Like, you know, when you talk about partners, like, oh, what'd you do with your boyfriend this week? And I'm like, this is like the beginning of like a very uncomfortable conversation. Making sure that you're gender neutral and being very aware of what language you use when speaking to anybody at all already, I think, makes you a great ally and sort of gives people the space, again, to be who they are, because you're not making assumptions, common assumptions that probably people part of the LGBTQ community face all the time. And so when you have that space that somebody creates by being very aware of their language, I think this is also really impactful.
Yeah, definitely. I'll second that. Nobody wants to have to come out every day. He wants to have that conversation every time. And nobody also wants to have to second guess what word they use depending on the person that they're speaking to. Do I say boyfriend? Do I say partner? How's that going to be received? Who am I speaking to? That's what we need to kind of get rid of, and that's kind of why education in the wider community and what allyship, by creating that safe space where that no longer matters.
Yeah, it's also about like doing it like kind of like even when like maybe like that queer person isn't around. So like it's talking to your friends and family and coworkers who maybe make a little slip up or like are just not aware. And it's not necessarily about calling somebody out. Like this is something I think about a lot. It's not like you did the wrong thing, shame on you, because that's not how we like affect change. People are gonna shut down and become defensive. Maybe just like kind of call them and be like, hey, like I saw you said this, and maybe like this would be a more inclusive way of doing it. And doing that with your people who you know directly is, I think, a really important step too.
I think at Delivery Hero, like diversity and inclusion is such a pillar that we're focusing on right now, and really opening up that conversation, welcoming feedback, you're right. It's not shutting people down and not shaming people. It's just saying, hey, let's like think about this from all the broad range of perspectives we have in this incredibly diverse multinational company. We're not just one homogenous group there. Looking forwards, I would love to know, what are some of the things coming up in your ERGs that you're excited for? What's planned for the rest of the year? We can start with maybe you, Patty.
Sure. We are still doing Lala, of course. We're also applying to sort of Proud at Work as sort of a emerging ERG. So these sort of side projects are happening within the team. Excited to get back to the office and have more in-person events again and really build our community and get back to that as well. So hopefully that will also be happening soon. But we have a lot sort of continuously in the mix throughout the year. And sort of looking forward to that. I think CSD may have been canceled.
It's next week. It's
Oh,
next week.
Okay.
It's a protest this year, so it's a little bit different than normal, but it is happening.
Okay, cool. I think we were doing something with that. I'm not part of that work stream, sorry, so I don't have much information on that one. But we are sort of getting more involved in the community and sort of raising our, so people see us and want to get involved.
Nice. What about at Wayfair, Rachel?
Yeah, I think that we're like very excited to get back to the office, but we're approaching with caution. So we really wanted to do something for CSD to get everyone together, but we also are really respectful of the fact that like Delta variant is ongoing. There's different levels of vaccination. So we're trying to engage with our community right now and see like what do people want. We have a lot of things planned in terms of like wanting to do more with charity, wanting to like get more involved with like further educational events in the coming quarters. But it's also, I think we're like in a little bit of a let's figure out what people want and what is going to be possible. Because if we're able to meet in person, of course, we want to get back together. But there's just the reality that it still might be a little while.
Yeah, I think for us, again, we're recently going through a real kind of education piece with the wider teams. We're doing some really cool stuff with the actual app, which hopefully you guys can see, which will be kind of supporting charity. And then a shout out to the team, because for the first time, N26 has now got all gender toilets, which we hadn't had previously. So well done to the team there. That was driven by the ERG.
Very nice. That's cool. Hopefully you also get to meet your team in person in the near distant future.
I know, right? Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah. Cool. We're gonna wrap up, but I basically wanted to just get like your final thoughts on community at work, why it's important, you know, how we can really make a difference by putting a value and placing importance on ERGs in the workplace. And I will start with you, Chris.
I think for me, going back to this point about community, this isn't just something which has touch points in the office. This isn't just about making somebody feel comfortable when they come through that door. This is something far bigger. This is about actually allowing them to be the person that they are, and actually educating yourself and being a part of something to help drive that change. Community is everybody being able to kind of work, feel comfortable, be happy, and to progress as individuals in a safe, open space where, you know, I can kind of free myself from any kind of negative kind of experience of the past and look to a better and more positive future, supporting a community.
Love it. Rachel?
Yeah, I think it's like there's the business side of things of like you retain employees, everyone's gonna work a little bit better if they're feeling happier. There's a more just kind of feel good side of things. It's like we want to be happy, we want to have connection, we want to see other people treated well, and we want to be treated well. And community is a huge part of that. And also, this has been a really great experience to kind of meet some of the faces of the other Way Out Pride ERGs, and I hope that we can all, in the sense of community, work together in the future to do maybe like events across company with all of our groups. That would be really lovely. And these are the kind of moments that allow us to come together, connect, and continue to build and widen our community.
I agree. That's actually a really interesting point. You know, like looking at the community, it's not just within the organization, it goes way broader, and it's, you know, even further than just like the Berlin tech scene as well. Patty, for you, what about the importance of community?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Rachel. I mean, I've already learned so much from you today, as we sort of, that I'm gonna take back to my ERG and try and sort of get those ideas into our teams. But yeah, I guess in the end, it's about sort of, I think it is a bigger thing because it's sort of being on sort of, for me, like the right side of social justice and sort of creating more social justice through work, a place where you spend a lot of your time, and a good starting point for creating communities where people validate, you know, the challenges and the issues that you go through. And so for me, ERGs are really integral to that. Because you empower people, you make them feel like they're heard, and that they have a place that they can go to sort of share frustrations and sort of wins as well. And I think building that community is really important, and it's not just about sort of those individual people. I think it really helps the organization grow as a whole as well, and sort of really being a fighter for social justice. And that's why ERGs are really important for me.
I couldn't agree more. Patty, Rachel, and Chris, I want to thank you so much for like taking this time to chat with me today and have this conversation. I think we've all learned a lot, as Patty said, and you know, we're all going to take something away with us. I think in particular, you know, just the fact that the ERGs can be a really safe space for everyone in the company. So I would highly recommend to anyone listening to maybe reach out to your ERG at work. And if there's not one, maybe even like think about the next steps towards creating one, I think is really where we go from here. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Lena, Rachel, Patty. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.